Hi, I want to thank you for looking at our presentation today. I had an awful lot of fun building this railroad and bringing to you the history of steam through the use of model trains. And I'd very much appreciate it if you'd like to take the time to give us feedback, thoughts, any improvements, ideas. We'd love to have your feedback, so feel comfortable in doing that. Thank you so much. Have you ever wondered how America got to be the world's most powerful nation? The answer is water, in the form of steam. That's right, the invention of the steam engine, and from that, the steam locomotive. That development in technology in the mid-19th century has changed our lives forever. I will present to you the story of how America grew to be a world power through the use of sophisticated model locomotives, which will illustrate how steam played a major role in the development of the Industrial Revolution. What I'd like to share with you is that the reason I built this railroad is I grew up in Schenectady, New York, and that was the home of American Locomotive. And when I was 4 and 5 years old, my father would take me over to the Elko plant, and I'd watch things like the Big Boy being constructed, and the Challenger, and many of the famous engines that made up the steam era, which ran from the middle 1800s up to about 1961. Fortunately, some of these engines have been salvaged, and you can still ride and enjoy the days when steam engines, the iron horses, were very famous, and you could see them all over the country. But growing up and listening to them go across the Mohawk River and their whistles blowing and the bells ringing, it was a different era, but it was a wonderful era to grow up. And what I've tried to do with this layout is to recreate the images, sounds of the steam era. And that's why we have a variety of engines, and not all of them are the same era. So we sort of blend it, which is our artistic capacity to do that when you're a modeler. What I really want you to pay attention to, though, is on each of these engines there are distinct and unique aspects. And as the technology advanced, these engines represent that growth in the industry. And then, of course, we get into the diesel engines, which is another whole time we'll talk about. And we do have some diesels to share with you later on. So sit back and enjoy, and I hope you get as much pleasure out of watching this railroad as I have built it and now running it and sharing it with you. Thank you. Well, here we are at the roundhouse, and Charlie here, who is our head mechanic, has just worked on the Class 9000 steam locomotive that was built at Elko, which is American Locomotive in Schenectady, New York, from 1926 until 1930. It is the longest single rigid frame engine ever built. This is before the articulateds became popular. And in a moment, the 9000 is going to roll out here onto the turntable, and you'll see what I mean. The only part that's articulated is the front truck, which has the lighting on it, so it'll guide the rigid frame engine along the track. These were used, the 9000s, largely in the West, primarily in Utah and the Wasatch Mountains, because they could carry, believe it or not, a mile-long train at 50 miles an hour, which in the late 20s, early 30s, and up, frankly, into the 40s, before the Union Pacific contracted Elko to build the Challenger and later the Big Boy, this was the engine that hauled those big loads. So anyway, take a look. Charlie's going to run off and do some work on another engine, and I'll see you soon. Let me check my watch here. Yep, it's time for her to come out. See you later. Now envision, if you will, that we're in a helicopter and we're flying over Rail Town and we're looking down on the scenes that are being produced, and you're looking at this very moment. You'll see tennis courts with people playing tennis. You may see people sitting behind hojos having a lunch on picnic benches. You see people fishing, people at the beach, canoers. The scenes are varied because we wanted to try to capture more or less real-life, unique situations. And if you will, think about it in terms of snapshots. Because although you would never find in real life all these things going on simultaneously in one place and no roads, you have to use your imagination. That's what modeling is all about. And what we've done is to create scenes so that as you look at each scene, you have a vision of life in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and the locomotives, obviously, which this is all centered around, is sort of the main character. But we developed that through using these scenes. So use a little creative energy and enjoy this, and I'm glad we can share it with you, and I'm going to sit back and watch it with you. Thank you very much.
lined up with the water spot for you. Pretty good. You got on the first try, and we didn't even have to uncouple from the train.
Well, quit wasting all the time by saving this and fill the tank.
Okay, I'm on it.
We only need 3/4 to finish this run.
Okay, 3/4 it'll be. Okay, we're 3/4 full in water. Glad to see you kept the steam up. Much obliged.
Now we can get underway.
We're all clear. Take it easy on the slack.
Hi, here we are. The engine that you're about to see is a Y6B. It was made by Norfolk and Western. It was produced roughly from 1936 into the mid-40s. It is one of the bigger steam engines that was primarily used again out west, and you'll notice that unlike the 9000, this is an articulated engine. And it carried very heavy loads, was capable, I'm told, of carrying loads up to 4 miles long. And what you're seeing in this scene is fruit and vegetable cars that are refrigerated backing into a siding midway across the country where they would change engines, because the Y6B has done its job, and now it'll pull into the engine yard and into its barn. And you might notice next to it is a Challenger made by Elco, one of the larger engines of its time, also articulated. And what will happen is a Berkshire or an Eastern engine will now pick up this load and take it onto the Eastern markets, where it's distributed to Philadelphia, Boston, New York, and further south into the Washington, Baltimore area. Lima Locomotive Works, located in Lima, Ohio, was famous for producing some very interesting and different types of locomotives. Lache was by far and away the most popular of the geared adhesion logging locomotives. There were two other successful designs, the Climax and the Heisler. Seen here on our layout is the 1906 Climax, built by the Climax Manufacturing Company located in Corey, Pennsylvania. Pictured here is old number 9 as it makes its way down from the mountain where the trees were felled on its way down to the sawmill and lumber yard. We hope that you enjoy the opportunity to see these very unique and special engines that were made really from the early to middle 1800s right up through to about 1920. And that is a Climax logging engine, which you can still see today if you happen to be in West Virginia, stop by Cass Mountain Railway. So you'll notice the drive goes through the center of the engine. And these engines were capable of taking very steep grades with heavy log loads in the areas where they were doing logging. And this scene is coming across a bridge as it's taking the logs from where they were initially cut down to the lumber yard. The classic Climax engines were one of the earliest engines made roughly in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This happens to be a 1906 engine. It's number 9, and I'm very pleased to have it on the railroad and be able to show it with you. In the late 40s and early 50s, many railroads were interested in upgrading their steam engines to look more modern. So they enclosed all the pipework that you see along the sides of the steam locomotives. Baldwin, Elco, which was American Locomotive, and Lima were the big 3 in steam engine production. However, what is most interesting here is we have a Norfolk and Western engine, which was probably the best example of that kind of technology at the time. And Norfolk and Western produced their own engines in their own factories. And this J-series engine, which you're now observing, passenger engine, was not only very unique in its design for its time, but functionally was one of the best engines made. and yet it was not made by the big three. It was made by the railroad itself. So enjoy watching the J series engine and the passenger train that goes with it that basically ran from Norfolk down through the South, Cincinnati, that area of the country. With the development of the railroads and the expansion of the country by virtue of railroads, people and products could move easily all over the United States as it grew. With that came the creation of the passenger station, which became a social center, a greeting spot, and a place for farewells. In this video, we focus on a passenger station of the 1950s vintage, and I want you to pay a special attention to the social dialogue that goes on, because that's an important part of our history.
Passengers only. I take the baggage.
Now departing for Los Angeles on track 1, train number 98, morning daylight.
Watch your step. Thank you.
All aboard!
Watch your step. Tucker giving us the IMO. All right, engine blower 45. 280, got plenty of feet.
This is one of my favorite engines on my layout. It is a, by the way, HO gauge is 1/87th of the actual engines that were out on running at that time through from the 20s up through the early 60s. One of my favorite engines is the Berkshire. The Berkshire engine was developed by Lima Locomotive Works in Ohio. It became one of the workhorses of all time. Later on, both Alco and Baldwin did jump in and produce Berkshires because there was such a high demand for them. They basically ran in the Midwest and Eastern tracks where the curves were a little steeper, the mountain ranges were a little steeper, and they could take Eastern freight loads and move them around. But this was a favorite, and I want you to enjoy looking at this Berkshire engine as it pulls a coal load through our mountain scene and then into rail town. And I want to wish you a complete and wonderful model railroading experience.